This is the presentation for new volunteer counselor orientation for tax year 2021 for Massachusetts District 6 Tax-Aide. Here's the agenda for this presentation. First of all, we're going to talk about the AARP Foundation Tax-Aide National Program. We're going to give you an overview of that. AARP Foundation Tax-Aide District. We're going to look at the district overview for South Shore, Massachusetts. What do volunteers do? We're going to talk about that. What skills do I need to have? How much time will I need to commit? What training will I be given? What do I need to do to obtain certification? And introduction to tax preparation. So we're going to talk about all those things. So welcome aboard. My name is Vern Chartrand. We're glad to have you here. The program absolutely needs new volunteers each year in order to keep the program viable and up to speed over the years. So let's talk a little bit more about it. So the AARP is broken down into two subdivisions. One of them is the division that provides the various products and services that often get advertised in some of the things that we see. And then the other side of the equation is the AARP Foundation, which is the charitable arm of the AARP. So it's really disconnected from the various products and services that you see typically advertised by the AARP, and it's really designed to deal with the charitable aspect of it. So we'll talk more about that. So the AARP Foundation, you can see on this slide, in a comparison to the AARP itself, the AARP Foundation works to end senior poverty by helping vulnerable older adults build economic opportunity and social connectedness. As AARP's charitable affiliate, we service AARP members and non-members alike. Bolstered by vigorous legal advocacy, we spark bold, innovative solutions that foster resilience, strengthen communities, and restore hope. So here you can see some of the programs that typically are provided by the foundation. So here's the logo for the foundation itself. So let's talk a little bit about AARP Foundation Tax-Aide and the history behind the program. We're now finishing our 52nd year. The program really began in 1968 with only 4 volunteers. And we have gone from that, 4 volunteers, to as many as 3,500 volunteers in tax year 2019, and 5,000 sites around the country that we were preparing tax returns for seniors and other people, even younger. So we're now the nation's largest free volunteer tax program that works in conjunction with the IRS. So we partner with them. Much of the information and training that we receive comes through the IRS. So we're very tightly connected to them. The nation's 4th largest tax preparation program is what we have here, whether it be paid or free. So our numbers compete with some of the largest tax preparation firms in the country. So we're pretty substantial. And 2.5 million people were served in 2019 to get their tax. So you're going to probably hear me talk more about statistics from 2019 than I will about 2020, because as we all know, the pandemic had a detrimental effect on the program, and we did not produce anywhere near the volume of tax returns that we did in 2019. So I won't be referring a lot to statistics from 2020. So what is the AARP Foundation Tax-Aide? As I said, there are almost 5,000 sites. There were 4,800 in 2019, 35,600 volunteers. We did 1.6 million federal returns in 2019. We served 2.5 million people, and we gave them total refunds of $1.4 billion. So by having their tax returns done for free, they were able to overall collect $1.4 billion. Earned income tax credit, we got our taxpayers over $200 million nationwide. So people that really needed the assistance from the earned income tax credit were able to get it with our help. I'd like to give you a little overview of the Massachusetts District 6 Tax-Aide group. There are approximately 70 volunteers here in District 6, which is essentially the South Shore of Massachusetts. So it goes from Quincy to the north all the way down to essentially the bridge going to the Cape, so all of Plymouth, and it extends to the west to Route 24. So essentially all that area in the South Shore of Massachusetts. So the district coordinator for District 6 is Maria Maggio. This is her second year as the district coordinator of District 6. And we look forward to working with her again. Here's our program objective. The objective is to provide caring, courteous service that results in correct tax returns and the optimum outcome for each taxpayer. And of course, self-fulfillment for our volunteers as well. What do volunteers do? Well, counselors prepare individual, federal, and state tax returns for the most part. That's what the counselors do. They also answer questions that are within the scope of training. We do not have them deal with issues that they have not been trained on. So it's only issues that are within scope they are free to answer questions on. Otherwise, they will refer questions probably to their local coordinator. So there's always a chain of command where they can escalate questions up the chain. They also prepare amended returns. There are a multitude of reasons that a return may need to be amended, and one of the things that the counselors do is they prepare amended returns. But what we have found in the past is that in the process of training people to become counselors, we find that there's a small percentage of people that do not feel well suited to the role of counselor in our group. So we just want to make you aware that if you turn out to be one of those people, that we need you to consider other roles within our group as well, because there are in fact other roles, and people think, well, gee, if I can't prepare tax returns, then you probably don't have a spot for me. But that's not the case. We have client facilitators. These are people that deal with the incoming clients, people that go to a site, the taxpayers that go to a site. The first person that they deal with is the client facilitator. The client facilitator is essentially a screener. So the client facilitator will go through the documents that a taxpayer will bring in and just screen them to make sure that, number one, what they brought us is in fact in scope and something that we can do. In some cases, people bring us things that are too complicated, and the local coordinator will decide that somebody's tax return is out of scope and that we're not able to do it. But the client facilitators have a key role and are very, very critical to each site. So we always need client facilitators. Communication specialists, people that deal with the media, as far as recruiting new volunteers, for instance, letting the media or letting people in a particular town or area know that the program exists. So we need to get the word out there in newspapers and various other media, just letting people know that we exist and that we're there to help people and that our service is free. We also have technical specialists. We have people that are dealing with laptop computers, printers, scanners, all these various hardware components. So we need technical people all the time. We generally never really have enough technical people. So if you have those kind of skills, you can be very helpful to us. We're currently, during tax season, we use Chromebooks exclusively. So Google and Google Chrome, if you've got a lot of experience with that, those are useful tools for us as well. But generally, once the season begins, if anybody's using a Windows computer for doing practice returns or anything like that, that all stops, and we all switch to Chromebooks. And then all through the tax season, we're using exclusively Chromebooks. We also need appointment coordinators, people that take phone calls and book appointments. In some cases, some of the sites use the front desk at the senior center for booking appointments. But in other cases, there are people, I know in the case of Marshfield, we actually have somebody, one of our volunteers that works from home and takes calls at home and books appointments on the computer. And that works very well for Marshfield. But every town that has a Tax-Aide service available has a different way of handling appointments. Sometimes the senior center takes care of it for the Tax-Aide groups. Other times people within Tax-Aide actually take the appointments. And then we have administrative coordinators. There is a need to track a lot of information about volunteers in a very complete, very accurate database. And so anybody that has database experience or feels comfortable working with data, we certainly would love to entertain you and have you serve in that role for us. But one thing you need to know is that you're never alone. There's always someone there that can help you. If you become a counselor and you run into a situation that you're uncomfortable with, you just raise your hand. Somebody will come over, or somebody that's working close to you may be able to help. But your local coordinator will always answer any questions that you might have.
Are volunteers liable? So as a new volunteer, I'm sure that's a question that you would ask. Am I liable for any mistakes that I might make? Tax-Aide volunteers are protected by the Volunteer Protection Act of 1997. As long as volunteers stay within the scope of the program as defined in the scope documents, you would not be liable for anything that goes wrong. And as long as you prepare only the returns that you've been trained to prepare, and for the tax years that you are certified for. And as long as you follow AARP Foundation Tax-Aide policies and procedures. You do not knowingly prepare fraudulent returns. First of all, the IRS standards of conduct is the one thing that you need to agree to when you become a Tax-Aide volunteer. Each volunteer agrees to comply with the standards of conduct by signing a volunteer agreement, and this is a little bit of what part of the agreement looks like. Here is the rest of the agreement that you'd be signing, and so that's just for you to see. So, do not accept payments. Do not solicit business from taxpayers. Do not knowingly prepare false returns. Do not engage in criminal or infamous, dishonest, notorious, disgraceful conduct. Treat all taxpayers in a professional, courteous manner. And here you can see all of those things repeated. So you need to follow the quality site requirements, QSRs. There are 10 of them. Quality site requirements help ensure the quality and accuracy of the tax return preparation and consistent operation at the sites. Volunteers agree to comply with and follow the 10 QSRs as per the standards of conduct. Here are the 10 quality site requirements. First of all, you need to get certified. You also have to study the intake and interview and quality review process and make sure that you adhere to it. You need confirming photo identification, taxpayer ID numbers. So you need to verify with each taxpayer that you see that their identification has been verified. At many of the sites, that is done by the client facilitator even before you as a counselor gets to see the person. So depending on the site, you may or may not be required to check that ID yourself. You may have somebody before the taxpayer gets to you that has already done that. So it's site dependent. Reference materials, you need to be aware of what your reference materials are, and you need to know how to access them at all times. The volunteer agreement, of course, you need to sign, which we just discussed. You need to make sure that the tax returns are filed in a timely manner. And again, that may or may not be your role at the site that you're at. A lot of times the electronic return originator, the ERO, has the responsibility to make sure the returns are filed in a timely manner, or the local coordinator may have that responsibility. You as a counselor may not have that responsibility, but someone in that site needs to have that responsibility. You also need to ensure that civil rights are maintained at all times. So we do not discriminate against anyone. Correct site identification number. Well, that is not necessarily something that the counselor is responsible for, but somebody at the site needs to make sure that the tax returns that are done with the correct site ID number printed on them. Also, correct electronic filing ID numbers. Again, that's something that the ERO, or the electronic return originator, is responsible for. But a big one is number 10, security. We need to make sure that taxpayer information is kept secure and that there is no risk that their information may be shared by people who are nefarious in nature. Tax-Aide scope. All counselors must prepare only the tax returns that are within scope, and scope is defined in a couple of places. There is a specific Tax-Aide scope manual that is printable or is available electronically online. And also, if you look at publication 4012, there are two types of publication 4012. There's the IRS version, and then there's the NTTC version, which is the National Tax Training Committee under the Tax-Aide banner. So the NTTC modified version has the Tax-Aide in and out of scope table that you can refer to, and it's specific to particular forms. So you can find out whether a particular form is in scope or out of scope for the Tax-Aide program. So you identify out of scope returns as early as possible in the process, so that we don't spend a lot of time spinning our wheels on something that ends up being out of scope. So I can't tell you how many times we have actually spent time on issues that ended up being out of scope. So a counselor may spend up to an hour or an hour and a half on a tax return, only to discover later on that there's a part of the return that's out of scope. So that's all wasted time at that point. You need to bring it to your local coordinator's attention, and oftentimes those taxpayers are sent somewhere else, and we've wasted our time with them. So we really want to be aware of what's in scope and what's out of scope, and try to nail that down as early in the process as possible.
So the next topic is security, privacy, and confidentiality. In the case of in-person tax preparation, where somebody comes to your site and is having their taxes prepared, and the person is going to remain there until the taxes are finished and then is going to leave. In those cases, we do not retain any paper documents or electronic copies of documents or anything of that nature. Once that taxpayer leaves, they leave with everything that they brought with them in the first place. We never keep anything. But in some situations, especially since COVID-19 has been around, there are some sites that have been scanning documents into electronic format, other sites that have been doing what's called drop-off, where taxpayers will drop off their paper documents and someone will prepare their taxes, and the person will come back several days later perhaps and pick up their tax return. In those cases, there is an IRS form that needs to be filled out, Form 14446. It has to be signed by the taxpayer, giving us permission to hang on to that information for a limited amount of time. So I think the number is 15 days. I don't think we're allowed to keep taxpayer documentation any longer than 15 days. So that generally that's enough time for us to get the job done. The next item on the list is name tags. We expect our volunteers to always wear an identification badge, and the identification badge has to carry their first name and only the first initial of their last name, where we don't put our last name on the badges. We don't divulge the last name information to taxpayers that ask for that information. It will only give the last initial, the first initial of the last name. We also keep confidential the personal information about other volunteers. So we don't talk to taxpayers about personal information about other volunteers, even though they may ask questions about other volunteers. That's private information, and that's to be kept private. We also require that volunteers promptly submit incident reports if there is any lost data. So if by some strange thing that might happen, we lose a document that belonged to a customer, to a taxpayer, or if we had scanned their information and suddenly that information is lost, it was stolen electronically, or so we have to immediately have that escalated to their local coordinator, and the local coordinator will fill out what's called an incident report.
Okay, summary. All volunteers must complete a Tax-Aide policies and procedures training. They must make sure that they're aware of what the policies and procedures are. So there's a training module that you can quickly go through and make yourself aware of those things. That isn't something necessarily that you need to go through at this stage, but perhaps a little bit later on. Pass the IRS volunteer standards of conduct. And the intake and interview quality review tests. So you're going to have some very basic tests. These are very simple tests, easy to pass, very much common sense. So I don't know of anybody that's had difficulty with those particular tests. So it requires that you read a little bit of information about exactly what standard you're being held to and how the process works, and then you answer a few questions, and that's the end of it. So it also requires now that you wear your name tag with your first name and your last initial only. And in summary, also all counselors must pass the IRS intake, interview, and quality review test, not prepare returns that are out of scope. And as I said before, we have a scope manual that you can refer to. Not prepare returns which what you are not trained to do and you do not have sufficient knowledge to prepare. So you don't want to do returns that you're uncomfortable with because you haven't been trained. Even if it's in scope, if you haven't had the training, effectively it's out of scope. You can bring it to your local coordinator's attention. They can pass it along to someone with more experience than yourself, but don't just dive into something that you have no experience doing. Do not prepare a return if they believe that the taxpayer is not truthful about information provided. So if you get the feeling from a taxpayer that they are not being straightforward with you and not giving you all the information and are trying to pull the wool over your eyes, you do not have to prepare that return. You can let your local coordinator know that you're suspicious of what's going on, and the local coordinator can make a decision as to whether you should proceed with that tax return or not.
What is the time commitment associated with participating in the Tax-Aide program? Well, we have to break it down into two separate categories, one for the training aspect and the other for actually volunteering. So first of all, the training, the self-study program that we're using last year and this year essentially takes about 40 to 50 hours of mentored self-study over a 6-week period. From mid-October, actually it begins October the 18th, to the end of November. And then additional training is required for Massachusetts especially, and for any updates in the federal tax code that may result from Congress initiating new initiatives in January. So in December and January, the commitment is certainly not as large as it is to study initially to become a counselor, but there will be some training in December and January. Now, after that, the actual tax season, you can plan on 12 to 16 hours per week actually preparing returns. Now, last year, it was a little bit different. There was probably a lot more than 12 to 16 hours a week because we had fewer preparers actually preparing returns and they were working longer hours. But in a normal year, 12 to 16 hours is pretty much what most of our volunteers put in. But we're flexible. If we have enough volunteers at a particular site and some volunteers really only want to volunteer on one day a week instead of two, we can certainly make arrangements for that. And so each site has a schedule that they follow and they can plug various volunteers into various time slots. And so it varies a great deal. So we count on your commitment, but we recognize that you are a volunteer. We appreciate the fact that you're volunteering, and we make allowances for pre-planned vacations, which a lot of people in the winter months do plan vacations to various places, and we make arrangements for those things. And usually we have enough volunteers that we can get those vacations covered. So what training is provided to the new counselor? Today is effectively your first day of training. We will demonstrate and verify that you can, number one, access Vern's self-study folder on Google Drive. That is a folder that I have set up that basically contains everything that you will need during your training. The same documents that I have in my self-study folder are also accessible on the AARP volunteer portal. They have a folder called libraries, and under that they have training materials. So you can access the same information from either place. I just made it more convenient by putting everything in one place so that you don't get confused by a lot of documents that are unnecessary at this stage. You can download required training materials from the folder that I've set up. You can access Link and Learn lessons and workouts on irs.gov. And I just want to say a little bit about Link and Learn. Link and Learn is a fantastic tool that the IRS has created for new tax preparers, or actually for not only for new tax preparers, but also for taxpayers that want to refresh their memory from the prior year. There's a lot of reading involved, but they make it interesting. Link and Learn has a lot of graphics that keep it more interesting. It's interactive, so they do a lot of quizzing throughout just to make sure that you've retained the information. So it's not as dull as reading a technical manual, for instance. So they've done a good job at really making it more interesting. So this is actually part of the self-study program. It includes Link and Learn, and you'll see how that's all tied together when I go through a demonstration. You'll be able to log on to Practice Lab, which is essentially TaxSlayer Online, which you'll see in future slides. You'll see the TSO. TSO is short for TaxSlayer Online, so this is kind of your first introduction to my use of TSO. You'll be able to enter basic tax return data. Again, my demonstration will show you how to do that. You'll be able to access irs.gov forms and publications, such as publication Pub 17, various other forms and publications on irs.gov, which I'm sure you're already familiar with anyway. So what are the requirements for certification? First of all, we expect that you're going to participate in the self-study program and go all the way through the program. You're going to have to show confidence in being able to prepare tax returns in TaxSlayer Online by completing at least 4 assigned practice problems. So we will assign, as part of your certification process, we will assign 4 intermediate level practice problems that you'll have to complete and complete correctly. So we'll provide the answers to you for those 4 problems, and it's up to you to generate a tax return that that comes up with the same answers that are in the what's called the answer key. You'll have to pass the certification test that the IRS produces with an 80% minimum correct answers. You'll also have to pass the standards of conduct test, which is a very simple common sense test, actually, the standards of conduct, and the intake and interview as well. Both of those tests are pretty much common sense. Most people can pass them without really even doing any studying because they are common sense. But there are a couple of questions that probably in order to get right, you'll have to do the reading. But the advanced certification test is more involved and is more difficult. And there are a number of questions in the advanced certification test that are a little on the tricky side. But I would say 80% of the questions are very straightforward. And generally, last year the test was a little more difficult than it had been in the past. I'm not sure what it's going to be like this year. We haven't seen it yet. But it was a bit difficult last year compared to the year before. And I know some people complained about that. But there is also what's called a retest. So if you don't, for some reason, don't make 80% on the initial test, you have what's called a retest, and you can take the retest, and if you pass it the second time, then you'll still be certified. So you don't get 3 tries at it, you only get 2. But I don't know of anybody that has failed the retest. If they've failed the initial test and they've taken the retest, they in every case that I'm aware of has been able to pass the retest. All requirements must be completed before the beginning of the tax season, and hopefully at least a couple of weeks before the beginning of the tax season. So we hope that you don't delay. We don't suggest that you get it done sooner than you feel comfortable getting it done, but also don't be a procrastinator either.